The Republican National Convention was supposed to be Ron DeSantis' crowning moment. The Florida governor had spent months positioning himself as Trump's heir, the future of the conservative movement. But what happened on that stage in Milwaukee changed everything in just 60 seconds. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked onto the debate platform with a small recording device in her hand. The audience had no idea what was coming, neither did DeSantis. What she played next didn't just end his presidential dreams, it destroyed his political career forever. The secret audio recording revealed conversations that DeSantis thought would never see the light of day. Conversations that showed the real Ron DeSantis behind closed doors. And when millions of Americans heard his actual voice saying things that contradicted everything he stood for publicly, the Republican Party had no choice but to act. This is the story of how one brave woman brought down a political giant with nothing but the truth. Before we dive into this incredible political earthquake, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these explosive political stories that the mainstream media won't tell you. What happened next will shock you to your core. Ron DeSantis wasn't just any politician. At 45, he had built himself into the Republican Party's golden boy. The Harvard-educated lawyer turned Florida governor had taken on Disney, fought COVID lockdowns, and positioned himself as the conservative warrior America needed. His resume was impressive. Navy veteran, 3 terms in Congress, and a Florida governor who had turned the state into a conservative paradise. DeSantis had the backing of major donors, the support of Fox News, and polls showing him as the only Republican who could beat Trump in a primary. The Republican establishment loved him. Unlike Trump, DeSantis was disciplined, focused, and scandal-free. He could deliver conservative victories without the chaos. Wall Street donors were lining up behind him. Even some never-Trumpers were quietly supporting his rise. But there was always something calculated about DeSantis, something that felt rehearsed. His supporters called it presidential discipline. His critics called it fake. On the other side stood Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas. The 43-year-old civil rights lawyer had quickly become one of the most feared voices in Congress. She didn't back down from anyone, and she had a reputation for doing her homework. Crockett grew up in St. Louis, worked her way through law school, and spent years fighting for justice in the courtroom before winning her House seat. She was known for her sharp questioning during committee hearings and her ability to cut through political nonsense with facts. What most people didn't know was that Crockett had been quietly investigating DeSantis for months. She had sources in Florida, connections in the legal community, and a network of people who had worked with DeSantis over the years. She had heard whispers about private conversations, about what DeSantis really said when the cameras weren't rolling, and she had been patiently building a case, waiting for the right moment to strike. This wasn't just about one politician's career. This was about the future of American democracy. DeSantis represented a new kind of conservative authoritarianism, polished, educated, and potentially more dangerous than Trump's chaotic approach. If DeSantis could win the Republican nomination, he would likely face Biden in the general election. Polls showed him winning. The Republican Party was rallying around him as their best hope for retaking the White House. But Jasmine Crockett had information that could change everything. Information that would show the American people who Ron DeSantis really was when he thought nobody was listening. The question was, would anyone believe her? And would the truth be enough to stop a political machine that seemed unstoppable? It was July 2024, and the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee was in full swing. DeSantis had just delivered what pundits were calling the speech of his life. He had attacked Biden's record, outlined his vision for America, and received a standing ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes. The momentum was building. Delegates were switching from Trump to DeSantis. Major endorsements were rolling in. The betting markets had him as the favorite to win the nomination. But Congresswoman Crockett had requested time to address the convention. As a Democrat, this was unusual. But convention organizers agreed to let her speak as part of a unity segment designed to show bipartisan cooperation. What they didn't know was that Crockett had been planning this moment for months. When Crockett walked onto the stage, the Republican audience was polite but skeptical. Here was a progressive Democrat at their convention. What could she possibly have to say that they would want to hear? "Ladies and gentlemen," Crockett began, her voice clear and confident, "I'm here tonight because sometimes the truth transcends party lines. Sometimes what matters most is not whether someone has an R or D next to their name, but whether they tell the truth to the American people." The audience grew quiet. This wasn't the typical political speech they were expecting. Governor DeSantis has built his career on being the authentic conservative voice, the man who says what he means and means what he says. But I'm here tonight to ask a simple question. What if everything you think you know about Ron DeSantis is a lie? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some delegates looked confused. Others looked angry. But everyone was listening. Crockett continued, her voice growing. "Stronger. For months, I've been investigating Governor DeSantis's record. Not his public record. We all know about that. I'm talking about what he says and does when he thinks nobody is watching." She paused, letting the tension build. "What I discovered will shock you. Because the Ron DeSantis you see on TV, the one giving speeches about conservative values and fighting for freedom, that's not the real Ron DeSantis." The audience was getting restless now. Some people were booing. Others were calling for security. But Crockett stood firm. The real Ron DeSantis is a man who says one thing in public and the complete opposite in private. A man who has been lying to you, to his supporters, and to the American people about who he really is and what he really believes. "Now I know what you're thinking," Crockett said, raising her hand to quiet the crowd. "You're thinking, this is just partisan attacks. Just another Democrat trying to tear down a Republican. But I'm not here with opinions or accusations. I'm here with proof." She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small recording device. "Ladies and gentlemen, what I have here are recordings of Governor DeSantis speaking privately with donors, staff members, and political allies. Recordings where he reveals his true thoughts about the conservative movement, about his supporters, and about the values he claims to champion." The crowd fell silent. Even the media members in the press section were leaning forward, sensing that something major was about to happen. These recordings were made legally by people who were in the room during these conversations, people who became so disturbed by what they heard that they felt a moral obligation to share the truth with the American people. DeSantis's campaign team was now frantically trying to get convention organizers to cut Crockett's microphone. But she had timed this perfectly. The major networks were broadcasting live, and cutting her off now would only make the story bigger. "Governor DeSantis has spent years building an image as the champion of conservative values," Crockett said, her voice rising. "But the recordings I'm about to play will show you that behind closed doors, he mocks those values, laughs at his supporters, and reveals plans that would shock even his most loyal followers." She held up the recording device, her finger hovering over the play button. "The question you have to ask yourselves is this. Do you want a nominee who tells you what you want to hear in public while planning something completely different in private? Or do you want the truth, even if it's uncomfortable?" The tension in the convention hall was electric. Everyone knew that whatever came next would change everything. "I'm going to play these recordings now," Crockett announced. "And after you hear them, you can decide for yourselves whether Ron DeSantis deserves your trust, your vote, and your party's nomination." Crockett pressed play, and Ron DeSantis's unmistakable voice filled the convention hall through the sound system with crystal-clear audio quality that had been professionally enhanced to ensure every word would be heard by every person in the massive venue. The silence that fell over the thousands of delegates was deafening as they strained to hear every word, many leaning forward in their seats as if getting closer would help them process what they were about to hear. In the first recording, DeSantis could be heard saying with casual arrogance, "Look, I have to say what these people want to hear. The whole freedom thing, the anti-woke stuff, it polls well, so we go with it." But honestly, half of these voters couldn't find the Constitution if you handed it to them. They just want someone to blame for their problems. The crowd gasped audibly, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the air out of the massive hall, as this was their champion, talking about them like they were idiots who existed solely for his political benefit. Elderly delegates who had volunteered countless hours for his campaign, driving hundreds of miles and spending their retirement savings to attend this convention, sat frozen in their seats like statues, their DeSantis 2024 buttons suddenly feeling heavy on their chests like badges of shame. Young conservative activists who had seen DeSantis as their generational leader felt their hearts breaking as they realized they had been played by a master manipulator. When an unknown voice asked if he believed in the conservative principles he was promoting, DeSantis replied with a chuckle that sent chills through the audience like fingernails on a chalkboard. Principles are fine for campaigns. Governing is about power. Look at Trump. He said whatever got applause and it worked. I'm just doing it smarter. The convention hall erupted like a volcano as delegates shouted in anger and disbelief, their voices mixing into a cacophony of betrayal and rage, while cameras captured faces of shock, betrayal, and fury throughout the audience that would become iconic images of political devastation. Some delegates were crying openly, tears streaming down their faces as years of political faith crumbled in real time. Others were shouting profanities that had to be bleeped from the live broadcast, and many were already reaching for their phones to record their own reactions for social media posts that would go viral within hours. But Crockett wasn't finished, and she paused dramatically for nearly 30 seconds before playing a second recording that was even more damaging, letting the tension build as she watched DeSantis's face grow pale from the side of the stage. The anticipation was palpable as she held the device up for everyone to see, rotating it slowly so the cameras could capture every angle before pressing play again with the deliberate motion of someone pulling a trigger. DeSantis's voice continued, with the same casual arrogance that now sounded like nails on a chalkboard to his former supporters. The Disney thing was perfect theater. Got the base fired up, made me look tough. But behind the scenes, we've already worked out a deal. They'll make some minor changes, pay a small fine, and everything goes back to normal. Meanwhile, I look like I took on the woke corporation and won. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt because this Disney fight had been the cornerstone of DeSantis's conservative credibility, the single moment that had separated him from other establishment Republicans and made him the hero of the culture war movement. Parents who had supported him specifically because of his stance against Disney's influence on their children felt physically sick as they realized it had all been an elaborate performance designed to win their votes while secretly protecting the very corporation they wanted him to fight. When a donor's voice asked if it was all for show, DeSantis responded with obvious amusement in his voice, the kind of laugh that bullies make when they think no one can hear them. Everything's for show. Politics is entertainment now. People don't want policy. They want heroes and villains. I give them what they want, and they give me their votes. The audience was in complete chaos now, as these were the exact moments that had made DeSantis a conservative hero, and he was revealing them as nothing more than scripted performances designed to manipulate their emotions and secure their loyalty, while planning to betray them the moment he gained real power. The third recording delivered the knockout punch that would end DeSantis's career and haunt him for the rest of his life when his voice said with frightening clarity and obvious satisfaction, "Here's what they don't understand. I'm not doing this to save conservatism. I'm doing this to save the Republican Party from conservatism. All this Trump populist stuff, the culture war nonsense, it's a dead end. Once I'm in power, we pivot back to what works. Pro-business, low taxes, but drop all the crazy social stuff." The words hung in the air like poison gas, slowly spreading through the crowd as the full implications sank in, and delegates realized they had been supporting someone who viewed their deepest beliefs as obstacles to be overcome rather than principles to be defended. This was their supposed conservative champion, admitting that he planned to betray everything they believed in once he gained power, treating their core values as nothing more than campaign tools to be discarded when convenient. When a staff member asked about supporters who believed in those issues, DeSantis callously replied with the tone of someone discussing cattle or sheep, completely devoid of any human empathy. They'll follow whoever's winning. Give them some red meat occasionally, but the real agenda is returning the party to people who actually know how to govern. The Bush era, but smarter. The convention hall was in complete meltdown as delegates streamed toward exits like refugees, fleeing a disaster zone, their faces showing the kind of betrayal usually reserved for personal relationships. Others ripped up their DeSantis signs with tears streaming down their faces while screaming his name in anger. And the boos became so deafening that the building seemed to shake, and the audio engineers had to adjust their equipment to prevent feedback. The cameras captured everything in stunning detail that would be analyzed frame by frame for years to come. Stunned faces throughout the crowd that looked like they had witnessed a betrayal of biblical proportions. Some delegates holding their heads in their hands as if trying to wake up from a nightmare. Campaign staffers frantically making phone calls while their faces went pale as they realized their careers were over, and major donors shaking their heads in disgust as they calculated how much money they had wasted on this elaborate fraud perpetrated against the conservative movement. One delegate from Iowa, a grandmother named Betty who had driven 12 hours with her husband to attend the convention and had mortgaged her house to donate to DeSantis, was caught on camera saying with a breaking voice that would be replayed millions of times, "I can't believe I supported this man. He thinks we're all idiots. I feel so stupid. How could I have been so blind?" Meanwhile, a prominent conservative podcaster with 2 million followers and a direct line to Trump tweeted in real time with obvious fury, "This is over. DeSantis just lost every conservative in America. I've never felt more betrayed by a politician in my entire life. This man is a fraud and a liar." The energy in the hall had completely shifted from celebration to devastation, as if everyone had suddenly realized they had been the victims of an elaborate con game orchestrated by someone they had trusted with their political future and their children's inheritance of conservative values. DeSantis himself rushed to the stage in a panic, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his face flushed red as he tried desperately to grab the microphone from Crockett. But she had planned for this exact moment too. "Governor, would you like to explain these recordings to your supporters?" she asked with perfect calm, her voice steady while his world crumbled around him, still holding the device like a weapon. DeSantis, his face now completely red with anger and panic, his hands visibly shaking, stammered into the microphone with none of his usual polished delivery. These are taken out of context. This is a Democratic hit job. You can't trust anything." His voice cracked on the last words, revealing the desperation he was trying to hide. But Crockett cut him off with surgical precision, her voice ringing with authority. "Governor, that's your voice. Those are your words. The only context needed is that you said them." She then played one more devastating clip that would become the most quoted line of the entire scandal, where DeSantis said with chilling condescension, "The beautiful thing about conservative voters is they're so eager to believe in someone, they don't ask hard questions. Tell them you're fighting the deep state and they'll follow you anywhere." The crowd's boos became a roar that seemed to come from the depths of their souls as even DeSantis' own supporters turned against him with a fury that was frightening to witness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Crockett said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a sword, "this is the real Ron DeSantis, not the man on your campaign posters, not the hero of conservative media. This is a man who sees you as marks to be conned, supporters to be manipulated, and voters to be fooled." She turned directly to the cameras with the confidence of someone who knew she was making history and declared with unwavering conviction, "America deserves better than politicians who lie to your face while laughing behind your back. Ron DeSantis isn't the future of conservatism. He's everything that's wrong with politics today." The convention hall was in complete chaos as DeSantis tried to respond again, his voice now completely gone from shouting over the crowd, but his Microphone had been cut by production staff who realized the damage was already done, and security was moving in while the damage spread beyond the building. The recordings were spreading across social media instantly like wildfire, with Ron DeSantis lied trending within minutes, and the clips being shared millions of times before the convention had even ended. Within an hour, major conservative figures were calling for DeSantis to withdraw from the race immediately, with Tucker Carlson tweeting in all caps, "If these recordings are real, Ron DeSantis has betrayed everything we believe in. This is the worst political betrayal I've witnessed in my lifetime." And Sean Hannity, one of DeSantis's biggest supporters who had dedicated countless hours of airtime to promoting him, going on air that night with visible anger to say, "I feel personally betrayed. We trusted this man to lead the conservative movement, and he was planning to destroy it from within. I owe my audience an apology for promoting this fraud." The Republican National Committee called an emergency meeting within hours as major donors pulled their support faster than dominoes falling, and campaign staff resigned in real time, many posting their resignations on social media with scathing statements about their former boss. The hours following Crockett's revelation were, unlike anything in modern political history. The recordings didn't just damage DeSantis, they destroyed him completely. By midnight on the day of the convention, DeSantis had lost the endorsements of 47 major conservative organizations. The National Rifle Association, which had been planning to endorse him the next week, issued a statement saying they could never support a candidate who views gun owners with such contempt. The Family Research Council, a major evangelical organization, called DeSantis's comments about using social issues as red meat for voters a betrayal of millions of Americans who sincerely believe in these values. Even Fox News, which had been practically running DeSantis's campaign for months, turned against him. Laura Ingraham opened her show that night by saying, "We were lied to, our viewers were lied to, and that's unforgivable." The hashtag Josh DeSantis lied dominated Twitter. For 3 straight days, the recordings were viewed over 100 million times across all platforms within 48 hours. Conservative influencers who had built their brands supporting DeSantis were scrambling to distance themselves. Ben Shapiro released a 20-minute video explaining why he could no longer support the Florida governor. "I've spent years defending Ron DeSantis," Shapiro said. "I believed he was the principled conservative leader we needed. To find out that he was manipulating all of us, that he saw conservative principles as nothing more than campaign slogans, it's devastating. The memes were brutal. One showing DeSantis with Pinocchio's nose got 5 million likes. Another comparing him to a used car salesman was shared by over 2 million people. But it wasn't just conservatives turning on DeSantis. Democrats were celebrating, but many were also praising Jasmine Crockett's courage in exposing the truth. Once the recordings were public, the people who had secretly recorded DeSantis began coming forward to tell their stories. Sarah Martinez, a former campaign staffer, revealed that she had been recording conversations for months because she was horrified by the disconnect between what DeSantis said publicly and privately. He would give these passionate speeches about fighting for conservative values, Martinez told CNN. Then he'd get in the car and laugh about how easy it was to manipulate people. I couldn't stay silent anymore. A major Florida donor who asked to remain anonymous confirmed that the recordings matched conversations he had personally witnessed. Ron would literally practice different personas depending on who he was meeting with, the donor said. With evangelicals, he was the devout Christian. With business leaders, he was the pragmatic moderate. With grassroots activists, he was the populist fighter. None of it was real. DeSantis's collapse sent shockwaves through the entire Republican field. Candidates who had been positioning themselves as his alternatives suddenly found themselves as frontrunners. Vivek Ramaswamy, who had been struggling in polls, saw his numbers surge as conservatives looked for an authentic alternative. Tim Scott experienced a similar bounce, as did several other candidates who had been stuck in single digits. But the biggest beneficiary was, surprisingly, Donald Trump. Despite being under multiple indictments, Trump's supporters began arguing that at least he was authentic in his approach. "Say what you want about Trump," one former DeSantis supporter told a reporter, "but he never pretended to be something he wasn't." Ron DeSantis is just a better actor. Back in Florida, DeSantis's political career was in freefall. The state legislature, which had been rubber-stamping his agenda for years, suddenly began questioning his leadership. Lieutenant Governor Jeanette Núñez, who had been one of DeSantis's closest allies, called for his resignation. The people of Florida deserve a governor who respects them, not one who sees them as props in his political theater. Calls for recall elections began circulating, though Florida's laws made such an effort unlikely to succeed. But the political damage was done. DeSantis went from being one of the most popular governors in America to having approval ratings in the low 30s almost overnight. For Jasmine Crockett, the aftermath was transformative. She went from being a relatively unknown House member to a national figure overnight. Democratic leaders praised her courage in exposing the truth, regardless of party lines. Speaker Hakeem Jeffries called her an example of what public service should be, putting truth and integrity above politics. But Crockett's appeal extended beyond just Democrats. Conservative commentators who had been critical of her in the past began praising her integrity. "I disagree with Congresswoman Crockett on almost every policy issue," wrote National Review's Rich Lowry, "but what she did took real courage. She could have used those recordings to help Democrats in the election. Instead, she chose to expose the truth immediately, putting integrity above partisan advantage." The DeSantis scandal sparked a broader conversation about authenticity in politics. Voters began demanding more transparency from candidates, and opposition researchers started looking more closely at private conversations and behind-the-scenes behavior. Political consultants worried that the incident would make candidates more paranoid and less willing to speak candidly, even in private settings. But others argued that this would ultimately lead to better, more honest politicians. "Maybe politicians should be afraid to say things in private that they wouldn't say in public," wrote Washington Post columnist Jennifer Rubin. Maybe the fear of being exposed for hypocrisy will actually create more authentic leaders. Legal experts debated whether the recordings violated any laws. The conversations had been recorded in states with one-party consent laws, making them legal. But some argued that releasing them without DeSantis's consent could open Crockett to civil lawsuits. DeSantis's legal team threatened to sue Crockett for defamation and invasion of privacy. But legal experts said such lawsuits were unlikely to succeed, especially since the recordings were undoubtedly authentic. "Truth is an absolute defense against defamation," explained Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe. "And the public interest in knowing who their potential leaders really are outweighs any privacy concerns." The scandal also prompted serious soul-searching within conservative media. Many outlets had promoted DeSantis uncritically, accepting his public persona without digging deeper. "We failed our audience," admitted one prominent conservative blogger. "We were so eager to find a Trump alternative that we didn't ask the hard questions we should have asked." Some media figures defended their coverage, arguing that DeSantis had been effective at hiding his true nature. But others acknowledged that warning signs had been there for those willing to look. By the end of the week, it was clear that DeSantis's presidential campaign was over. Major staffers had resigned, donors had fled, poll numbers had collapsed, but DeSantis refused to officially withdraw from the race for another month, apparently hoping the story would blow over. It didn't. If anything, his refusal to acknowledge the recording's authenticity made the situation worse. When he finally did announce his withdrawal, the statement was brief and bitter. "The political establishment and media have chosen to destroy me rather than engage with my ideas. I will continue to serve the people of Florida and fight for conservative principles." Even this statement was criticized for failing to acknowledge the recordings or apologize to supporters who felt betrayed. The DeSantis-Crockett incident became a case study in political programs and journalism schools. It raised questions about privacy, authenticity, and the role of opposition research in modern politics. For conservatives, it was a painful reminder that not everyone who claims to share their values actually does. The movement became more skeptical of polished politicians and began demanding more proof of authenticity from their leaders. For Democrats, it was a reminder that truth-telling could be powerful, even when it involved exposing politicians from the other party. Crockett's example inspired other politicians to prioritize integrity over partisan advantage. As the Republican primary continued without DeSantis, the party struggled to find a new direction. Some candidates tried to position themselves as the authentic alternative to Trump. Others argued that the party needed to move beyond personality-driven politics entirely. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett found herself mentioned as a potential future presidential candidate. While she deflected such speculation, saying she was focused on her work in Congress, political observers noted that she had demonstrated exactly the kind of moral courage that voters claimed to want from their leaders. The question remained, would American politics learn from the DeSantis scandal, or would it simply find new ways to package deception for public consumption? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, Jasmine Crockett had changed the game forever. She had shown that truth could still triumph over political calculation, that authenticity mattered more than polish, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon in politics is simply telling the truth. The collapse of Ron DeSantis taught several important lessons about modern American politics. For politicians, authenticity matters more than ever. As in an age of social media and ubiquitous recording devices, private conversations can become public instantly, and those who try to be all things to all people risk being exposed as nothing to anyone. For voters, it's crucial to look beyond polished presentations and ask hard questions about candidates' true beliefs and motivations, recognizing that the most dangerous politicians might be those who tell you exactly what you want to hear. For media, there's still a vital role for investigative journalism and holding powerful people accountable, understanding that sometimes the most important stories aren't about policy positions or campaign strategies, but about character and integrity. For democracy itself, truth-telling still matters, and despite all the cynicism about politics, Americans still care when their leaders lie to them, proving that sometimes one person with courage and evidence can change everything. The Ron DeSantis scandal was a reminder that in a democracy, no one is above accountability, not governors, not presidential candidates, not political parties. And sometimes it takes someone like Jasmine Crockett, armed with nothing but the truth, to remind everyone of that fundamental principle. If this story shocked you as much as it shocked the political world, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We're the only source brave enough to bring you these explosive political stories that the mainstream media won't touch. Share this video with everyone who needs to know the truth about what's really happening in American politics. And let us know in the comments, do you think Jasmine Crockett was right to expose these recordings, or should some conversations stay private? Your voice matters, and we want to hear from you.